Welcome to this evening's special call meeting of the Muskogee Municipal Authority. Roll call, please.
Mayor Bob Coburn.
Here.
Deputy Mayor James Scully.
Here.
Dan Hall.
Present.
Marlon Coleman. Janie Boydston.
Here.
Wayne Johnson.
Here.
Patrick Kale.
Here.
Ivory Van. Derek Reed.
Here.
And we have a quorum. Item number 1.
Consider and take action with respect to a resolution approving and authorizing a clean water SRF loan from the Oklahoma Water Resources Board in the total aggregate principal amount of $27,360,000, approving the issuance of a Series 2017A Clean Water SRF promissory note in the total aggregate principal amount of $27,360,000, secured by a pledge of revenues, and authorizing its execution, approving and authorizing the execution of a loan agreement for Clean Water SRF loan, designating a local trustee, and approving and authorizing the execution of a trust agreement, approving and authorizing the execution of a security agreement, ratifying and confirming a lease agreement and operation and maintenance contract as amended pertaining to the water and sanitary sewer systems of the City of Muskogee, Oklahoma, ratifying and confirming a parity agreement, approving various covenants, approving and authorizing the establishment of a project cost disbursement account, approving and authorizing payment of fees and expenses, and containing other provisions relating thereto.
And we're going to need to let Tammy rest after reading that. Mr. Miller.
Yes, this is the first step in realizing what you all approved us to do. A month or two ago, you authorized us to use the revenues from the rate increases for infrastructure for our water and sewer to go out and secure up to $45 million worth of loans to improve those systems, and we outlined those programs and projects that this would go to. And so we've acted quickly and have been able to secure the first $27 million worth of loans under that program. And we'd like to bring that forward today. The sooner we get this approved, the sooner we can get started on improving the infrastructure. We do have Rick and Alan here to talk with us and give us details about what exactly we're doing with this lengthy agenda item. But the net result is that we'll get started on those infrastructure projects once we have this funding.
Rick.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Mayor and Council, it's certainly a pleasure to be back. Alan Brooks, of course, is with me again this
Rick, that microphone may not be turned on.
That's where he sounds best.
Yeah, I hear you.
Is that it? All right. Is that better, sir?
Sound better.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. As Mike said, after you all authorized us to proceed at your meeting in early March, we worked very diligently with the staff, your public works and finance people, and others to get an application before the Oklahoma Water Resources Board for the sewer system improvements. As we discussed, the sewer projects actually were a little further along than some of the water projects, and we wanted to try to get a commitment on those projects and be able to capture interest rates where they were. And so we submitted the formal loan application and other supporting documents to the Water Resources Board. The Water Resources Board, their 9-member board, actually at their meeting on April the 18th last week, took up for consideration your request for the $27,360,000, and they approved it unanimously. At that meeting, of course, were Mike Stewart and Greg Riley, and then Jay Updike was there just in case there were some questions regarding the preliminary engineering that was done on those projects. Mike represented the city well. He did not embarrass the city, all right, and we got the loan approved. What is before you tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is a resolution. Alan's office drafted it, so if there are any questions, I'm sure he'll be glad to address those. But it's a resolution incurring the loan up to $27,360,000. You remember when we talked about this last time, it's a line of credit. So you only draw down the money as you need it. You're only paying interest on the money as you draw it down. And we've set up the principal payments not to begin for a couple of years or so down the road as the projects are completed, and we've wrapped it around your existing debt, all right? And that minimizes or mitigates any increase in your debt payments. The interest rate has been set on this loan. It's been set at 2.66%, which is a fixed rate for the 30-year term. That includes the 0.5% that the Water Resources Board charges as an administrative fee on these types of loans. But the 2.66 is an all-in fixed interest rate for the 30-year term. When I was here in early March, we were estimating the rate to be around 3%, because that rate isn't set until basically you're ready to approve the loan, as you are tonight. And we had estimated around 3% and came in at 2.66. What that means is that the interest cost associated with a loan is about $2.2 million less than what we originally had thought it might be when we were here 6 weeks ago. So that's certainly good news. If Mr. Chairman, or that's basically the presentation. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer. And of course, again, Alan's here as well.
Council have questions for Rick or for Alan, or for Mr. Miller, for that matter.
Thank you all for your efforts. It's a pretty big project for us. It's exciting as we go forward. And so I move for approval.
Second.
Thank you. Got a motion and a second. Any comment or discussion? Roll call.
Deputy Mayor James Scully?
Yes.
Janie Boydston?
Yes.
Patrick Kale?
Yes.
Wayne Johnson?
Yes.
Derek Reed?
Yes.
Dan Hall?
Yes.
Mayor Coburn?
Yes, motion carries, and that is the only item we had on the agenda for the special call meeting. We'll now go to our city council agenda for this evening. The invocation will not be by Ivory Van as is printed. He is not here tonight. It will be by Deputy Mayor James Gully, and then we'll have the flag salute following that. So please join us for those things.
Father, we come to you today with a heavy heart for Judge Bart Fight. Bless his family and comfort them as they go forward through some very trying times, Father. Father, again, we thank you for all the blessings you've poured out on the city of Muskogee. Help this council and future councils to manage this loan greatly, to provide the infrastructure for our citizens. Father, I see Mr. Blair here, and I know how hard he's worked for G-Fest. Bless those efforts and make that a very successful event, Father. We ask this in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Join us in the flag salute. Attention, salute, pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now consider the minutes of the April 10th regular city council meeting. Is there a roll call? Thank you, Tammy.
We've already done it once, huh?
I know we've called the roll once. We're all here.
Mayor Bob Coburn?
Here.
Deputy Mayor James Scully?
Here.
Dan Hall?
Here.
Marlon Coleman? Janie Boydston?
Here.
Wayne Johnson?
Here.
Patrick Kale?
Here.
Ivory Van? Derek Reed?
Here. Move that we excuse Mr. Van and Mr. Coleman.
Okay.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any comment or discussion? Roll call.
Deputy Mayor James Scully?
Yes.
Janie Boydston?
Yes.
Patrick Kale?
Yes.
Wayne Johnson?
Yes.
Derek Reed?
Yes.
Dan Hall?
Yes.
Mayor Coburn?
Yes. Now we'll consider the regular session minutes from April the 10th. Is there additions or corrections to those? And if not, we'll entertain a motion.
Move the approval.
Got a motion
Second.
and a second. Any comments? Roll call.
Deputy Mayor James Scully?
Yes.
Janie Boydston?
Yes.
Patrick Kale?
Yes.
Wayne Johnson?
Yes.
Derek Reed?
Yes.
Dan Hall?
Yes.
Mayor Coburn?
Yes. Motion carries. Consent agenda will be items 1 through 4. Is there anything on 1 through 4 that anyone would like to move to the regular agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion for the consent agenda.
Move for approval of consent.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any comment or discussion? Roll call.
Deputy Mayor James Scully?
Yes.
Janie Boydston?
Yes.
Patrick Kale?
Yes.
Wayne Johnson?
Yes.
Derek Reed?
Yes.
Dan Hall?
Yes.
Mayor Coburn?
Yes, motion carries. Item number 5, please.
Consider and take action with respect to a resolution of the City Council of the City of Muskogee, Oklahoma, approving action taken by the Muskogee Municipal Authority, authorizing issuance, sale, and delivery of a promissory note of the authority to the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, ratifying and confirming a lease agreement and operation and maintenance contract as amended and containing other provisions related thereto.
Mr. Miller again.
Yes, this is just an opportunity for the council to approve the MMA's indebtedness for the loan. It's to deal with the same issue, the same projects that we previously approved in MMA.
Move the approval.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any comments? Roll call.
Deputy Mayor James Scully.
Yes.
Janie Boydston.
Yes.
Patrick Kale.
Yes.
Wayne Johnson.
Yes.
Derek Reed.
Yes.
Dan Hall.
Yes.
Mayor Coburn.
Yes, motion carries. Item number 6.
Receive report from Spectra, operators of the Muskogee Civic Center, and consider approval for a budget amendment for the remainder of fiscal year 2017, or take other necessary action.
Mr. Miller.
Yes, I'd like for Mr. Garvin to go ahead and introduce this subject.
Mayor, members of the council, just to give you a little bit of background, as you're aware, the City of Muskogee entered into a management agreement with Global Spectrum, doing business as Spectra.
Here is your mic
Mic
on.
not on? Oh.
Not
He
hearing
turned
any
it off when
volume
he-
out of you.
Again, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Just to give you a little bit of background, the City of Muskogee entered into a management agreement with Global Spectrum. They're doing business as Spectra Venue Management, and that was back in July 2015. It was a 5-year agreement. We're currently 2 months away from the end of year 2. The agreement is for Spectra to manage and operate the Civic Center. Basically, they have the exclusive management and operational uses of the facility. We've asked Kellen with Spectra to come here tonight to talk with Mayor and Council to go over some of the highlights, some of the major events that have occurred in the past year, some of which we haven't seen at the Civic Center in several years, if any at all. We've also asked Kellen to go over the gross revenues, attendance, sponsorships, efforts made to obtain sponsorships, and their marketing plan. In closing, Spectra will talk about the current budget status. They'll talk about the amendment they're proposing to the budget tonight. They'll also talk about some of the budget-saving measures they took to help try to reduce that number they're requesting tonight. So with that being said, I'd ask Kellen to come up to the podium, go over his presentation, and answer any questions you may have.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. Garvin. Thank you, Council. Like Gary said, I wanted to take a minute today to kind of just give a synopsis over the past couple of years, or at least the last 20 months, before we kind of get going into the financial pieces of where we sit today. So when we took over management in 2015, on July 1st, we noticed that traditionally and historically speaking, that there was primarily 3 main events that were taking place, ticketed events that were taking place at the Civic Center. That was the Bedouin Shrine Circus, the Bedouin Shrine Basketball Classic, and the BRI National Finals Bull Riding event. When we took over management, there were some main focuses for us that were given as a part of our management agreement, which was to increase the event content for the city, give more events for city patrons to go to, and help increase the quality of life, and do that by reducing the subsidy of the Civic Center. So some things I want to talk today are some events that we've brought in over the past couple of years that haven't been here in years past, or if they haven't been here for quite some time. I won't go over the full list of events because I think that would be a little redundant, but I will touch on a few events that we were able to secure and bring in through our relationships and partnerships, not only with our company, but with third-party co-promoters as well. Those events were Lee Bryce and Granger Smith on the Jägermeister Tour, Randy Hauser and Frankie Ballard on the We Went Tour, the 1964 tribute, which was the Beatles experience, and then we got OSSAA State High School Basketball Regional Tournament back for the first time in a few years. That was in our first year of operation in fiscal year 2016. So far this year, with like Mr. Garvin said, we still have a couple months away to finish up this fiscal year, but here's a synopsis of the events that we've been able to secure this year, which was Ted Nugent Sonic Baptism Tour, Jeremy Camp on his I Will Follow Tour, the Harlem Globetrotters, which was the first time that they played here since 2005, Jake Owenhouse, Wild Kratts Live, The Price is Right Live, Sesame Street Live, and Beach Boys and the Temptations, which just finished up last week. So as you can see on the graph, we took the events, live ticketed events that were taking place at the Civic Center from 3 to 12 in just a matter of less than 2 years. That was a pretty substantial feat that we feel like, getting that number of events to secure for a market our size and a community here in Muskogee. Obviously, a lot of those events didn't perform the way we would have hoped them to, but it's certainly not without effort that those events were here and brought here. If we go to the next slide, we'll kind of touch on a few key pieces of the financial data. So what I wanted to present is a snapshot of what the finances look like prior to us taking over management and what they look like now. So if you look at the far left column, in fiscal year 2013, the subsidy for the Civic Center was $468,951. Total revenues that were brought into the Civic Center in fiscal year 2015 were $127,193. That's revenue from rental income, concessions, and any other additional revenue that they brought in over the course of that fiscal year 2015, whether it be sponsorship revenue or any recognized revenue for the Civic Center. If we move over to fiscal year 2016, our subsidy was $455,112. In that year, last fiscal year, we brought in $314,300 in revenue. That's more than doubling the revenue in fiscal year 2015. We increased those revenues by a margin of $187,000 versus the previous year, and we did that by increasing attendance to 79,000 patrons. That's paid and non-paid patrons for all ticketed events throughout that year. We also did that on an indirect expense cost savings of $105,627 in fiscal year 16. What that cost saving measure was for fiscal year 16 was reducing the amount of utility expense by having some venue closure days, postponing some hiring positions that we currently have staffed now and will into the future. And as we go over to the third column, fiscal year 2017, we are projecting a subsidy of $430,820 again this year. Right now, as our financials sit through the end of February 28th, we collected $462,827 in gross revenues so far through the end of February. Now, the reason that's through the end of February is because March financials have not been submitted to the city yet, and they will not be until the first of next month, which we're contractually obligated to give those to you within 30 days of closing the month end. That's an increase for 2017, fiscal year 2017, of 300% of live ticketed events that we brought to the city. That's an increase of well over $148,527 versus last year. So that's an increase versus fiscal year 15 of $335,634. That's $335,634 taxable revenue dollars that you weren't getting in 2015 that we brought so far just this year, with 4 months left to go in the financial recognition of this fiscal year. The last piece on that column is a projected catering revenue loss in the amount of $86,930, which we compiled over the amount of events that took place from January 1st, 2016 through March 31st, 2017. And the reason that we wanted to put that in there, because those are again, additional gross revenues that we would like to see coming into the Civic Center in years forthcoming with the proposed kitchen project, which is set to be underway next fiscal year. The next slide that I wanted to touch on are all of the budget saving measures that we've implemented for this fiscal year to cut costs down even more. I think one of the main things I wanted to focus on today was how much revenue we've generated over the past 2 fiscal years, and the importance on that revenue growth to your bottom line on sales tax revenues for the city. Obviously, the bottom line of the budget for the Civic Center is an important piece, and that's just as important to us as it is to you. The reason it's as important to us as it is to you is because we are financially incentivized to adhere as closely to that budget as possible. We certainly want to save you more money because obviously that helps out our business model as well. So as I'm focusing very much in today's presentation on how much revenue we've been able to increase for you, and taxable revenue that we've been able to increase for you over the past 2 years, it's not without a grain of salt that we're not recognizing that, the bottom line needs to be improved. And part of that is with budget cuts in every department, we presented a budget which we thought was going to be what it takes for this fiscal year. And like most budgets and all budgets, I think I'd be fair to say, were reduced. So we are certainly giving it all of our effort to get there and meet that bottom line. But I wanted to show you exactly how much increase in revenues the city is getting at the same time, while we are not meeting that bottom line for the fiscal year end budget. So some budget saving measures that we've taken into effect as of April 3rd of this month are venue closure days, which is going to save an estimated $26,464 over the rest of this fiscal year. A reclassification of staffing positions, myself included, relocating the GM to another venue within our portfolio in Texas to save us $22,827. A reclassification of a marketing and sales position from full-time salary to full-time hourly, which saved us an additional $2,700. And a reduction of a part-time janitorial and operations position with an estimated savings of over $4,000. There's still paper credits that are due to be recognized on upcoming financial statements from April, March through June, and that number is in there as well. So I wanted to focus on what we've done over the past couple years to help increase your sales tax revenues and paint a picture of where we plan to be for future years with some of the catering revenues that are potentially going to be coming in years in the future. And then also revisit the AP ledger, which has been provided to you in your packet today. So the current AP standing that we have at the facility is $126,881 in payables. The piece I want to highlight on this is the majority of that outstanding payable is to our company. We have put off paying our corporate companies so we can pay our third-party contracted vendors as much as possible and as much as we have the funding to do. And that's what we're going to be requesting today is an additional immediate payment of the $126 plus a little bit of buffer that will get us through the end of the fiscal year. So what we're proposing is an additional immediate payment of $133,000. That's what I have prepared for the presentation. I'm happy to take questions on any of that.
Give us just a second to kind of absorb this. And
If you don't mind, I want to point out that we do, out of that number, the city has budgeted, we haven't paid them all the money we budgeted them for this fiscal year, so they're not requesting to go over budget by this amount. There's approximately $41,000 that we have budgeted that they've not yet billed us for, so their actual request above and beyond budget is about probably roughly $92,000. Just to be clear, that even though the ask is for that 133, that's really the amount I think that he's saying will get them through the end of the fiscal year. We already have budgeted $40,000, so the additional new revenue is closer to 92.
So where does that leave us from the original contract?
original budget.
The original budgeted contract. Wasn't it 300 and something thousand? 300.
Our budget this year is $352,000.
And so how much over that are we going to give them?
Well, I think the request is for about this $90,000.
The request is for about the $90,000. If you're looking at an all-in number, we're looking roughly rolling variance of about, again, the $80,000, which would take us up to about $430,000.
$430,000. What happened in 2013 that we've spent 468,000 on?
Can you back up to that slide,
Thank you.
possibly?
Does anybody on city staff know?
It predates my employment here, and I'm afraid I don't quite know. I'm sorry to say.
Gene, do you have a
There we
clue
go.
on that number for 2013 subsidy?
I believe we did some capital improvements in 2013.
So that wasn't all subsidies to go into the city, the civic center. And on 2014, 360, that still seems like we went over a little bit there than what we did. Was we still doing something there? Still adding to this?
That was operational cost. This 350, 360, 370 range
Okay.
was pretty typical. I'm like you, Dan, I didn't remember 468, 951 in 13.
Yeah, I thought we were staying right around the 3 mark, and then, but that kind of makes understandable if we did some improvements to the civic center at about that time. So that's really not a good number to compare 2013 to the other numbers to, because it's not operational cost, it's more
Capital
improvements.
improvement, not
Yeah, so
subsidy.
it's not a good budget. It's not a good number to gauge anything by. And then you were throwing some numbers at us really quick, so I was trying to figure them all out as I went, and I'm not very fast at that. So
Sure, I think it's on the screen here. If you
you were throwing some numbers out that you had 79,005 people there. Was that over all the events?
that is the attendance as a whole throughout that fiscal year of 2016. That's correct. That is an increase over 2015.
And we subsidized that for $455,000 that year?
Correct. Fiscal year 2016 subsidy was $455,112.
That was all for operational cost?
That is correct.
Huh. I
So
did not know that.
$155,000 additional cost and got 79,000 additional people. Is that correct?
That's 79,000 total, not additional.
Okay. What is the 2015 total attendance number?
I don't have that figure right in front of me.
On the subsidy for 2016 and the projected subsidy of 2017, are there any capital improvement monies mixed in with that number?
There were some capital improvement monies in fiscal year 2016 and fiscal year 2017. The capital improvement monies would not have been on our account because the capital improvements took place on your accounts for fiscal year 2017.
So,
To answer your next question, which is the amount of what capital improvement is in the fiscal year 2016, I can certainly get that number for you, which would break out of the 455.
I'm just curious to Mr. Hall's concern, and I'm assuming that this 2013 subsidy is a city number, but capital improvements need to be backed out of my estimation, true subsidy numbers. And
Just compare operating to operating?
Right. And apparently in 2016 and 17, these are true subsidy numbers. Is that right? No capital improvements. And the 2017 number at 431, we need an additional 90. Is that right, Mr. Miller?
Yes, sir.
That brings it to the total of 431.
Okay.
That's on the original budget was 352.
Okay, so the 90 brings it to 430.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Roughly.
Another question I have, in 16, with our total gross revenue of 314, and of course in 17 it'll be interesting to see how it pans out because you've only got 2 months worth. But go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say there's 4 months to be recognized in total revenue throughout the rest of fiscal year 17. So we're estimating well over $500,000 in gross revenues for FY17.
Do you know, revenues are certainly wonderful, and when you look at these as a revenue, it's impressive, your increase in revenues. Can you tell me if any of those revenues turned out to be profit numbers, or if we had offsetting costs associated with those revenues, and if we did, how much were they?
Sure, yeah. So that's done in our monthly financial packets, and I'm happy to provide those to you, which details each event that took place throughout that month of the financial statement. There's many events that we've done that have produced actual revenue, not just gross revenues on the balance sheet, but profit is what you're looking for. There's also events that we've done that have lost revenue, that have not produced profit. Those are all outlined in those monthly financial packets, and we'd be happy to provide those.
Yeah, everybody needs to understand, and I personally am real pleased with your efforts to try to find out what clicks for Muskogee, and you've done a great job of that. One thing that people need to understand is, if I open my lemonade stand and it costs me $5,000 to put in, and my cups cost me $0.25 apiece, and lemonade costs me 75 cents, and I've got $1 lemonade into my costs, but I am selling my lemonade for 50 cents, and I've got $1,000 in revenue. Well, I've lost 500 just in my cups and lemonade. One thing I'm curious about while I've got you up there, how did we do on our last concert?
Yeah, Beach Boys, the final event settlement for that is still in the works. We hope to have that finished up tomorrow. Rough estimate looks at about a $40,000 loss shared between us and the co-promoting partner. So the liability loss on behalf of you is $20,000 roughly.
What was the total ticket sales, the quantity of tickets sold?
That number off the top.
Total ticket sales was about 1,600.
16?
About 1,600. Attendance was 1,466.
Okay.
And I believe gross revenue was about 85.
Okay. What, if you kind of shift off the numbers for just a second and go to, I think maybe where Patrick was headed with this too, is kind of give us event by event how those turned out, and then what we learned from those.
Sure. What we're learning most is how to better effectively market for all of those events, not just the ones that were successful, but more importantly, I believe the ones that weren't successful. Our marketing efforts for each of those events roughly averages $10,000 to $15,000 in marketing budget. That budget is used to market these events in the Muskogee market, since we are the main demographic for the events that come here. But we also have to understand and realize that Muskogee is part of the Tulsa DMA. What that means is that's the Tulsa market area. A lot of the folks that live in Muskogee are listening to not only Cliff and Katie in the morning, they're listening to K95 Country out of Tulsa. They're listening to the Eagle for classic rock. So we do market on some of those platforms in Tulsa. We certainly are shifting our marketing mentality that fits better for the local community, doing a lot more in the Muskogee Phoenix, doing a lot more in the Payne radio groups, which service Muskogee, Eufaula, Tahlequah, and some of these surrounding communities. I think that's going to be the biggest shift in our marketing efforts throughout the next 3 years of this contract, in really trying to hone in and focus on where our ticket purchasers are coming from. It's unique in the fact that every event is different. I wish I had an exact answer on why the walk-up at BRI is astronomical and why it's not at other events. If I knew that, I think we'd be in a much better position.
Everybody likes beers and bulls.
There you go. And certainly we've done our best to bring more of those events in. So we're trying to contract with them for a summer event as well, which we're in the works with, and I think that's about done, and the contract's about signed on that one. So increasing that from a one-time-a-year event to a two-time-a-year event to not only bring in more people, increase the quality of life, but also increase revenues for us and our partners that we work with at BRI as well. To revisit the events in particular, there's certainly some highlights that stand out. Wildcrats did over $131,000 in gross revenue. That was a highly successful event. The caveat to that is we only spent $3,000 in marketing on that event, so we spent less than a third of what our normal budgets are on some of these events on one event, and that's just the industry. Sometimes some events just really take off, and some you fight tooth and nail for to get every last ticket sale that you possibly can, and they're not quite as successful as the others. But areas of success that we found are some of the family show content, at least the major market and very popular family show content. The Christian market content that we brought in has been successful. Obviously, the agricultural events that we've had throughout the past couple of years have been successful as well. So those are areas that we're continuing to focus on and increase the event load there in particular. But what we've done over the past 2 years is really try and diversify the types of events that we bring in, from family show content to the agricultural events, to working with OSSAA, to rock, to country, to Christian, to magic. I mean, we've really tried to diversify that event content to figure out what works. I think there's still a few that we're working on that we haven't had yet, which we're actively seeking out to try and make sure that we've touched on all the bases and figure out what works.
What are the attendance numbers so far for 2017?
I knew you were going to ask that. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can certainly provide that to you after we get out of this meeting. Thank you, Mr. Garvin. 70. You're asking number of patrons?
Yes.
40,344 as of February. Again, there's still 2 months that haven't been recognized yet through the financials. So there's a pretty big number for events through the end of February and into March and April.
What's your next event coming up?
I've been out of market for about a month, so I'm going to defer that question.
Gun show?
Gun show's coming up in May. We do quite a few number of graduations for Connors and in Muskogee High School. If the weather is unfortunate, it takes a turn for the worse, and then Hilldale High School. So those are the events coming up in May.
What events have we discovered that just don't work for us?
I don't want to say that they don't work, because I
don't
feel
work for us at this time.
Sure, the ones that have been the biggest downfalls, I think, have been the concert sector. That's your Lee Bryce and Granger Smith, the Randy Hausers, the Ted Nugents, and unfortunately the Beach Boys.
Given other venues that you manage corporately, is that the trend there as well?
Not always. Not always. With a couple, yes. The trend for Beach Boys and the Temptations currently, unfortunately, is a bit low. The trend for Ted Nugent was fairly low. But there's quite a few events that we've had. There's quite a few events that we've had that have been very similar, if not the exact same event, that have performed better in other markets.
I'm going to sound really bad here. I didn't even know Ted Nugent came to Muskogee. And I'm a Ted Nugent fan. That's how bad, how is it that he can come to town, be in a concert here? I listen to the radio, watch TV, fairly in contact with our city, and I have no idea that he's even in town.
Sure. I'll touch on some of our marketing initiatives for that event in particular. We were on the Eagle Classic Rock Station out of Tulsa. We did over 500 table tents that were put on local restaurant tables throughout Muskogee. We did 250 posters that were hung around town. We did, I'm not exactly sure the amount that we did on Fox and other cable news networks. But I mean, I'm happy to provide you the marketing plan and the marketing.
I must have missed every one of those because you'd have had one more person at least.
There was we had some, I think, unique hurdles with that event. It was over Labor Day weekend, which is a tough weekend to get folks away from the river and the lake. But we still felt that it was it was a good opportunity for us to produce the event and make it successful. I think everybody in the planning committee that approved that event all had the same idea, that we thought it was going to be successful. And sometimes, unfortunately, you just see that they just I can't make someone buy a ticket. I can certainly try, but.
Do you feel like having Taylor here on board, where you got somebody focused on marketing, is going to be a difference maker? Can you tell in the event since she's been here if that makes a difference?
Sure. I think the marketing department is a vital piece of our business. I think we can always, we could have another marketer. I think that would help. Unfortunately, with the budget restraint, I don't think that's possible. I think she makes a difference? Absolutely. I think she's great at her job. I think she's got a lot of potential ahead of her to help push the needle and move the needle on a lot of our future events. And I think that she's a vital asset to our staff at the facility. If you don't know, our staff is very small. We're the smallest administrative staff in our entire company for a venue our size. Most of our venues staff between 6 and 9 employees. For a venue that's comparable size to this, you currently have 3. I'm not there. Taylor is certainly a big impact on that, and the marketing department, as well as Daniel, who's assumed the GM role. He was our assistant GM and director of operations, and Brad Acker, who's our event manager. And they've been extremely vital in making sure that the events go off without a hitch. I think the consensus that we've got on Beach Boys and Temptations is that it went very well. Certainly didn't see the attendance number that we would hope for.
How many did you have before y'all made the adjustment to the budget? How many employees?
4.
Y'all just lost 1?
4 full-time employees. We have 2 part-time employees that serve as janitorial and housekeeping. We did add a part-time staff accountant position. We share the expense on a finance position with our venue in Enid, again to reduce cost for you, the client, managing the Civic Center. So currently you have 3 full-time employees and 2 part-time employees. You had 4 and 2 before that.
If we were to approve to get the subsidy done for the remainder of this year, what would cause us to think we wouldn't be having this conversation a year from now?
The important thing to note on our budgets is they're completely variable and subjective on revenues. I wish that we could present you a budget every single year that we know is going to be that budget every single year. Unfortunately, it varies depending on the success of events, and that's not just our venue. That's every managed venue, whether it be private or publicly managed, across the board. If you're hosting events where your revenues are dependent on people showing up, there's always going to be a variable there. You're never going to have an exact number, and it's never going to be black and white. It's always going to change depending on the way events do. Certainly, we hope it changes for the better when events sell like the Wild Kratts events do, and that's certainly our hope, and we're still optimistic that we will get there. But that's the reality.
If we don't approve the $90,000, but we stay within the budget, then we're just delinquent to your company in making payments for a management fee. Is that correct?
That's not correct. Currently, in the AP, there's 52,000 that's delinquent to, roughly 52,000 that's delinquent to our corporate office. The remainder of that 126 is delinquent AP to all of our third-party vendors. And I think
Right, but
that
we've
really
got-
hits home with some vendors that we work with locally.
Right.
You know, we can't pay bills if we don't have operating funding to do that. And I think, you know, that hurts our local vendors the most.
Well,
We've put off
I guess
paying
what I'm
our
saying is
corporate
if we extend the $40,000 that's already budgeted, who's going to get that revenue? Spectra or the other vendors, or it'd be paid on a as-billed, as-due basis?
Sure. We haven't been paying our corporate office first. We've been paying them last on everything that's been funded since, you know, mid-September.
Okay.
So the thought, you know, we want to pay the vendors that are backdated the most at this point, and we want to pay our local vendors that we work with on a more intimate basis right away.
So even if we budget $450,000 for next year, y'all could come back and say, well, we overspend again. You all owe us $550,000. I didn't know that when we first voted on this 2 years ago, because apparently that was kept away from my attention, because I would have never voted yes for it. Because when they told us that there was $350,000, what we were going to budget for y'all is what we were told that y'all was going to spend, and that would have been it. Because that was pretty comparable to what we were assuming that we spent previous. I'm finding it hard to swallow because we set a budget, we had a contract, and I assumed that contract was, this is what it's going to be. I know that in my job, if I keep going over my budget, someone's going to either fire me or do something else. I'm having problems following that.
Here's part of the problem.
And
We've tasked them to try to build our civic center up, and part of the risk involved there is saying, okay, you want us to build events. That means we have to bring in events. And in this period of exploring and trying to see what opportunities work best and what opportunities don't, there's going to be a lot of losers. Unfortunately, the only way to figure out what a loser is, what doesn't work well with Muskogee, is to learn the hard way. And so when we bring in 13 events a year instead of 3, and 6 of those events crash, and if we only lost 20,000 event, at a whack, there's 120,000. That's a big part of the problem. I can see where if, let's say, 2017, 18, if instead of having 12 events that were mixed, you had 10 events that you kind of back off a little bit and go, let's go to our bread and butter. Let's bring in bull riding twice a year. Let's try to do the kitty. Let's try to do the kitty deal again. Let's do some things. Let's just kind of back off and be a little cautious and try to do some of these events where we know we were net or close to net or made a profit. And you'll see these numbers swing dramatically. But the problem is, that's why I'm all, these revenue numbers sound good. We had $500,000 in revenue, but we had another $200,000 in losses. So that doesn't help us. We're having to, the things we are subsidizing are loser concerts. And if we figure out that we just can't do concerts, this next year could turn around if we had 4 bull riding events a year and they were successful as they are. But that's the problem when you bring somebody in and task them to take your program from doing nothing to doing something. So a certain amount of criticism is genuine and fair, but you have to look at what we've tasked them to do, and they've tried, and now we all need to learn something from this, certainly, but that's kind of a catch-22 situation. I'm sure if we sat on our laurels and did 3 events a year and everybody just sat there, our subsidies wouldn't be this large. But we're trying to see if we can't build a little bit of excitement in Muskogee, and we're having growing pains.
It's kind of interesting, when we began the concept of G-Fest, it was pretty well talked about and discussed openly that the first year would be a learning experience, the second year might break even, and the third year might make money. But it certainly, we didn't approach it in a one-year thing and say, well, let's try this one time, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, we're out of here.
And
it was kind of a commitment to go 2 or 3 years in the process, and that's kind of where I'm thinking, is that where we are with Spectra? We're at the second year, looking at the third year, and maybe what Patrick's saying is figuring out those events, as long as we don't just repeat the same scenario we had in this year, our numbers are going to look better.
Well, and this is where
year 3.
And this is where I'm coming from. We're on a tight budget, and we've been going to a tight budget since last year. And I'm looking that the people who voted us into these positions said, hey, we trust you with governing our money. We had a contract. We had a set amount that we set aside. We can't keep going up because we still got to be responsible for the money that we're giving them. I know that we've got to invest money to make money, but at the same time, we knew what our budget was going into this. That's the difference between making $20,000 a year and making $100,000 a year in people working. Your budget's a little different. What you're willing to lose, what you're willing to gain is out there. I come from a $20,000 a year or less budget as I was growing up. I believe in being frugal with our money. We can't just say, here, we know we're going to give you $350,000, but you know what? Go ahead and take another 100. Next year, we're going to give you 450. Oh, here, I'll give you another 50. Just because it's trying to make Muskogee grow. If we're going to give them a budget, they need to stay inside that budget at all costs, because we don't have the money to keep going up just because they don't want to stay inside that budget. I may be the only person up here with that mindset, but that's my mindset. We only have $350,000 to give them.
I'll do you one better. Let's close the Civic Center.
You
save $300,000.
Yeah, you wouldn't have any.
If we need to, then we need to.
Well, that's what we.
Because right now there's people getting ready to be out of jobs and stuff if we are not careful.
That's the kind of decisions you need to make. My thoughts are that we've started this just like we have G-Fest. Possibly we need to shut G-Fest down before it gets started. I don't know, but
I don't agree with that statement. But I do agree
the money
that
we lost on G-Fest was I don't know, $750,000.
But the point is he coming back and asking for more money next year? He's staying within his budget.
No, well, it's not. You were talking about not being able to afford things.
I'm talking about going over the budget that we set.
But it's not fair to say you're on a $300,000 budget. Now I want you to bring in an act every month, and I want it to work.
Then they should have never agreed with that.
It's got to be one or the other. It can't be both. You can't have an unlimited number of acts in a limited amount.
It doesn't work.
Of revenue.
I think this year was different. I mean, we hired Spectra to come in and manage, and it's kind of like I would like both ends. You want to have your cake and eat it too. In the fact that we hired Spectra to come in and manage the Civic Center, we can all say, and I think our community can say, the Civic Center is a whole lot better than it was. We don't have the complaints like we did have. The quality of the venue is a whole lot better. We don't have the challenges that we had before. And last year, we didn't come in to the same degree, but we've brought in a whole lot more acts this year, or venues this year. There are a number of acts that are venues that I was quite concerned about. Ted Nugent was one of them. I could have told you from my perspective that will not work in Muskogee, but I wasn't hired to manage the Civic Center. We hired Spectra to do that. So, you know, it's not us that's making the decisions on what to have in there or not. We hired them to do that. But at some point, we need to have checks and balances on, you know, how much we're willing to put out there on how many events is going on, because there is a risk factor. They're managing the Civic Center, but how many events and how many venues each time, there is a risk factor, and we need to look into that. What I'm really concerned about, we were not kept advised of the budgeting situation early on, and that's very concerning to me. I mean, if early on we would have been knowing what venues was losing and and how we needed to adjust, that should have been done early on. That's how a budgeting situation works, instead of at the 9th hour. That's what my concern is right now. You make adjustments throughout the year. As budget changes, I understand that this is a fluctuating market, and we all have fluctuating budgets. I work in a maintenance department. Things break, we have to fluctuate the budget. But we don't do it at the 9th hour, and that's what I'm very disappointed with right now.
Let me ask this, and let's get some clarification from Mike Miller, city manager, because I think they have been communicating with Mike for a number of months, and Mike felt like it's at a critical point, and I think that's why we're having this discussion today. So to say that you haven't jumped in and told us anything till the 9th hour might not be totally accurate.
Right.
In summary.
I mean, some of it's our responsibility to monitor the budget, and we have. Last fall, we had conversations informally and informally with Kellen, saying we're worried about how we're going to get through the end of the fiscal year, because the budget, because some of the events that were early in the fiscal year, I think Ted Nugent was early in the fiscal year. Maybe it was the end of last fiscal year, I can't remember which, but we started off kind of in the hole, and so we had to figure out how do we adjust things. And so I want to their credit, they expanded some time in December, and even I believe in January. They had more dark days than they had originally planned. They shut the venue down. They implemented cost saving measures, even before the first of the year, based off of where we knew they were and where they knew they were. And so I want to make sure, number one, that we do know that we've been trying to monitor their performance, and then number two, as it's become clear that we're going to need to have this conversation, we've tried to make sure that we're getting the council the information in a timely way.
So, Kellen, going forward, and we say we're going to do 450 next year, 430,000 next year. What kind of safeguards are we going to put in? I know you have to book a lot of these events in advance, so there's always that risk because you have to be out there 8, 9 months, 10 months. After your experience, how close do you think you're going to be able to stay within that 400 if we decide to do $450,000 for the next year, that we're not having the same conversation this time next year?
Sure. I want to start off by saying it is never our intention to go over budget at any point in the game. I hope you understand that's contingent upon our company's financial allotment for managing your venue, in what proximity and relation we stay to budget. So that's a big driving factor for us to stay on budget. It's not as if we're just spending money to go over budget, willy-nilly or anything like that, or spending money just for the fact of spending money. A lot of the budget is dependent, again, on revenue. So I think where we may be getting lost is the fact that it's not the spending money that's offsetting the budget. It's the revenue not coming in from ticket sales that's offsetting the budget. So that's what I want to focus on. I think to answer your question in terms of safeguards, I think we need to realistically revisit, the expectation of how many events and how many risky events that we're willing to go after. The message to us when we took over management was book the events, and that's what we've been doing, is booking the events and getting the content in. I think if we want to mitigate some of the risk, we can look to utilize more co-promoting partners that share the risk with us on these events. We've done that a few times, especially on the events that are higher risk than others. The loss could have been a lot worse. I hate to paint a more negative picture, but on the flip side, the outcome could have been a lot better also. If we didn't take a co-promoter on Wildcrafts, we would have made another $30,000.
What do you mean by co-promoter? I'm not sure I understand what that means.
Basically, it's another entity that comes in, shares financial upside and downside on the event. They risk half of the money to secure the event. They get half the money, or whatever the deal structure might be if it's not 50-50, to secure the event, or they share on the downside. If we lose money, they're at risk for half of that as well. So that's what I mean by a co-promoter for events.
Did they promote that on their part a little bit more? That's probably why we got so many people from around the Oklahoma City area coming in here, wasn't it? In the Tulsa area.
Now, for Wildcrafts specifically, that event was a unique synopsis, and the reason for it is we were the only play in the entire state of Oklahoma. They didn't play Oklahoma City. They didn't play Tulsa. A lot of the event content that we get, the Sesame Streets, the Harlem Globetrotters, those types of things that are national touring events, even a lot of our concerts are not only playing here, they're playing Tulsa and Oklahoma City and Enid and Salina and Wichita and all these other markets here, there, and in between. So when we're competing for event dollars, we're always going to not do as successful when we're not competing for event dollars. So Wildcrats was unique in that fact. We weren't competing with anybody. The nearest competition was in Arkansas, and it was in Fort Smith. It was much further away. So I mean that event was successful for many reasons. The co-promoters that we use all have marketing departments too, and they all share a lot of the marketing and advertising efforts for those events. We have one we had one with Beach Boys and Temptations. We had one with Wildcrats, and we have more with others that help us market and advertise these shows as well, and take on some of the financial risk to do that themselves. So I think to kind of revisit back again, we need to revisit, realistically what the expectation is on number of events, live ticketed events for the year. Revisit how we structure those events, and maybe just look to doing co-promoted shows that lessens the amount of risk for us and financial obligation in the event that those events don't produce revenues like we hope they would. That's my recommendation.
Let me ask you a question. How for this past fiscal year up to this June, how many major events will we have had? 12, 11, 10?
You're talking for this fiscal year? Mm-hmm. Live ticketed events this fiscal year is 12. We just finished our last one.
Okay. I would be interested in seeing what your best 5 events were, and tell us what the net was on that, the net profit or the net loss, and then what your 7 worst events were. And I personally be interested in backing out those 7 bad events and seeing where we would have been.
Sure.
And the reason I'm saying that is what if we go, well, we're not in the best position right now to continue to go out there and really just throw the darts at the wall. Let's kind of be conservative and try to maybe have 5, 6 events this year. Heck, we're going to double the bull riding because we know that's a winner. We're going to try to do this because we know we did okay with that. We're going to try to do this. But see if we had that philosophy this next year, if we wouldn't come out a little better.
Sure.
And to see, and I appreciate the fact that you guys are trying to figure out the market, what's good. I mean, you can't figure it out without trying to figure it out. That's for sure. but I'd like to see just how hard we got hit with the 7, and then see how we kind of eked by with the 5, and that might give us an idea of how we could do next year if we took a little bit more conservative approach and tried to kind of marry the same type events or bring those back in, and it would get everybody up here kind of an idea of how it could be if we hit 5 shows on all cylinders and we just for a year or two said, let's quit trying to figure out what we could do, and let's just kind of stick with what we know we can do.
Sure. If we backed out just 3 events in particular, Ted Nugent, Price is Right Live, and Beach Boys, that's a difference of about $70,000. I can tell you that right off the top of my head.
Why did we do the Price is Right? Because we had the Family Feud here about 10 years ago, and I think like 8 people showed up.
That's a big part of the problem that we ran into when we took over management. Is there's no historical ticketing data that we have access to. There was no ticketing system in place. Everything was handwritten notes. We were lucky to find for Harlem Globetrotters that in 2005 you sold 500 tickets. How did we find that? That's written on a piece of printer paper when we took over management. I mean, there's a lot of things that we have in place to measure the success of certain events before we go after them. The reason we went after Price is Right Live is because it's doing great numbers all over the country.
But didn't they not bring their star with them?
The star doesn't go on any show. The Drew Carey doesn't travel with the show. It's a different product.
Okay.
You know, I think we do our best due diligence to try and vet shows. I'll never bring anything that I don't think has a chance to succeed. We have ticket data, event historical data that goes back decades for multiple events, not just artists, for family shows. And we buy that data and we see how those events perform, much like I'm sure a lot of our friends in the market do as well with the G-Fest and bringing in events like that. They're doing their research on what sells in other markets to make sure that we're bringing in the best stuff for Muskogee. Unfortunately, what we see oftentimes is Oklahoma City, Tulsa, and Enid and Salina that doesn't reciprocate. That we're not those markets, and we certainly try our best to market to our local community on those events. But there's always a risk. There's always a risk.
Well, Muskogee's a hard crowd. It is a hard crowd.
Do you think, Kellen, that you're beginning to see Muskogee begin to respond to some of these in terms of increasing ticket sales from the local market?
Sure. Yeah. So what I can share at the end of this fiscal year is a comparative data on how ticket sales for the Muskogee market in particular fared versus last fiscal. Unfortunately, a lot of this data takes time to compile, and it takes events to happen in order to compile that data. But what we've seen is large majorities of our attendance coming from the Muskogee and surrounding communities, and I'm saying surrounding like Wagner and Warner and Shakota and all of our relatively close proximity surrounding communities supporting the events. And so that's where our marketing advertising plans are going to shift to supporting those markets and going after those markets to secure ticket sales. And I think that's a big piece is figuring out where ticket purchasers are coming from, and we now have the database to do that.
So we're working off of our own data from the prior year comparisons.
Correct. Yeah, we're working off all ticketed data that we have on hand since we entered into the contract with our ticketing provider.
Mr. Tucker, I have a question for you. We do not have a contractual basis to not pay them. Is that correct?
No, not at this point. There is a provision in the contract that requires them to use all reasonable efforts to manage the facility as well as income and whatnot. And if they believe that they are not going to meet those, then they have the obligation to notify the city. And then the parties work together to come up with a plan to get as close as possible to meet those budgets. And in some cases, if that won't work and it has to be exceeded, then it comes forward to the council to actually approve that, an amendment.
I'm kind of like Mr. Johnson. I don't want to be approving which events take place and which don't.
No. This is just the budget amendment. That's all
okay.
they have to approve.
Okay. All right. But technically, we need to pay them. By the contract, them and vendors, by paying them, by paying Spectra, then the bills get paid.
That's correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I agree with what Councilman Kale was saying. We asked them to come in and increase the number of events and draw people into our market, and they're doing that. And we've learned in year one, we've learned more in year two, and it's time to approach year three and see if we've gotten it figured out. I don't like it the way it is. I wanted instant success financially, but I think, you know, if we looked at this, and if whether it's a G-Fest or a park, when we're trying to draw people in, we're making an investment in that capital item, just like we would in the Civic Center, to try and see if we can provide quality of life and entertainment and things that draw in tourism to our community. And I think you all have done that. Maybe they haven't been as successful as you liked, and they haven't been as successful as we liked. So maybe Patrick's idea of honing that in and kind of by event and evaluate it and say, okay, these events work for us, let's do more of them going forward. The ones that don't work, let's do less of them. And I think we've had a good discussion. It's been a lively discussion. But I think when we don't have a contractual basis to say, well, we're not going to extend you the additional money, and we don't have the authority to do that, it appears to me.
I would agree with that statement.
And I think you have communicated. Maybe we should have raised a big red flag a little bit more early on, but we've got a city manager that's new in the position. We've got Kellen that's new in this position, and we're learning this market. So thank you for bringing the information that we needed, and it may not have all been the information we wanted,
Sure.
but it's stuff we needed to hear. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your efforts in trying to figure out ways to cut the budget to help us get there in terms of figuring out our market. And I agree, whoever said this, but we're a little bit of a quirky market. We don't do the same thing other markets do. I agree. You know, we just had this discussion at tourism earlier today. Sometimes we don't respond as well in terms of buying tickets and being in the seat when it's time for an event. So,
Get you some T-shirts.
other comments or questions?
You had mentioned you could provide breakdowns of each event. I'd appreciate that if you could provide that to the manager and he could provide
Sure.
that to the council.
I believe they already have it through February.
Okay.
Again, the March financial statement will come out by Monday of next week, which is the 1st.
As we move forward on this, and apparently we're going to negotiate future monies going into this project, I would like to have a little bit more restraints on this, especially since it is taxpayer dollars, not our money apparently, because I don't have that kind of money to pay them, but it is taxpayer dollars that is going into this project. I would like to have a little bit more checks and balances and a little bit more restraints. I don't want to pick the events, but let's set a budget and stick with it.
Mr. Hall, one of the things that happens in the course of the events that are selected by Spectra, those are all brought to the city to review prior to the contracts that are prior to the offers being issued. And at that time, we can look and determine the level of risk that we're willing to take, because Spectra always brings in, if they've got an offer that we want to make and they're going to bring in a concert, they'll notify us as to what our break-even number is. And then we predict what level of interest there's going to be in the community before selecting that.
We're already participating in that process.
Correct.
Okay.
And so with what Councilor Kell was saying and being much more conservative on the level of risk, that can be managed on our side when we have those discussions with Mr. Seitz.
Well, I'm just talking about the bottom line, our total figure, whatever that's going to be moving forward. I just want to make sure that we're not coming back next year and going, yeah, 450,000 wasn't enough. Let's go 600 now. We can't do that. And maybe we didn't do a very good job of vetting our events last year. Maybe they should take a bit heavier role in picking our events and instead of us, because we didn't do a very good job of that either. I mean, that's what we're paying them for. Pick events, and that way we can hold them more accountable for what doesn't work than us. It sounds like we're 50% of the problem now on that. And if that's the case, they need to, if we're going to pay them that kind of money that they're asking, we need to hold them accountable for that, not us. We don't need to go, yeah, I don't think that one's going to work. So, and they go, and it could have been something that worked because of their stuff. They said they have all the data. We don't have that.
Well, no, they bring in recommendations with that. It's not just pick which ones you want to have.
No, but I'm not in the music business. I'm not in the act business. And they could bring me all the data in the world, and I'm not going to figure that out. That's what we're paying them to do, not us. So
let's do Wildcrest 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah, right.
yeah, probably is something will happen. And just like the bull riding, we can't get them 4 times because it's going to be flooding the market, and everybody's going, that's just the same thing. We'll have to wait for the next one comes.
We did do more than one event where we went on financial risk as our company with you, and we lost money with you on those events. And you know, that's certainly not our prerogative. That's not our business objective, and that's not our business plan to lose money on events. And we take that just as seriously as you do. Again, we're judged and based on how close we stay to that budget. So it's just as important to us as it is to you, Councilor Hall. And I want to reiterate that fact that we do everything we can to vet these events. We get event offers all the time that we turn down. Because we don't think that they will be successful. And when we take risk on events with you, which we have twice, and we've lost well over $50,000 of our own money on those events, we take that just as seriously as you do, sitting up there deciding whether or not we're going to go after those events. Every event that we bring is ultimately approved by you. If you tell us you don't want to do it, we don't do it. And you know, I do my best job to make sure I bring you content that's not going to lose money. Unfortunately, you know, some of that content more often than we would have liked has turned out that way.
Well, and apparently from one of your statements earlier that there's several people waiting here in our town waiting to get paid from the money that we need to vote on tonight. And I wish we weren't in that situation because it feels like now, because we don't want to make those people have to wait for a job that they've already done. So it's kind of, we're in the pond with you. So I guess we got to all swim or we're all going to sink tonight.
So
Let's let Mr. Miller summarize for us.
Well, to Mr. Hall's point, we've got two questions really that we're talking about. One is, what do we do now? And number 2, what do we do moving forward? And so what we need to, our question that I'd like for us to get to tonight, because we'll address next year's fiscal year budget as we go through the full budget process and how we have as much influence as we can on keeping the bottom line where we think it's going to be. That's a budget discussion for the entire fiscal year budget, certainly as it relates to this. But it does tie in. And so, but tonight what we want to talk about is what is it going to take to get through the rest of this fiscal year. Again, covering costs that we've already incurred or that they've incurred on our behalf, on events that have already happened, on vendors that have already done their work, and how do we get between now and June 30th. And so that's where we come to that $133,000 amount. And none of us are happy to be here. I guarantee you Kellen's not happy to be here asking for that.
But is that
amount of money.
$40,000 already budgeted?
Yes. So it's really about the $92,000 of extra money, and so what we need is to be able to make this happen, to be able to get through the rest of the fiscal year is a motion to approve those funds.
I move to appropriate the additional $90 some odd thousand dollars.
Why don't? May I interrupt? I think the better way to do it would be to move to approve the amended budget that was presented by Spectra, because that money is incorporated within that budget.
I move to approve the amended budget
presented
by Spectra.
So to be clear, that was the $430,800. Okay, thank you.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Is there comment or discussion? Roll call.
Deputy Mayor James Scully.
Yes.
Jenny Boydston.
Yes.
Patrick Kale.
Yes.
Wayne Johnson.
Yes.
Ivory Van.
Yes.
Derek Reed.
No.
Dan Hall.
No.
Mayor Coburn.
Yes.
We had 2 noes.
So how many you got?
3, 4, 5.
Okay, so you need.
It passed.
Passes.
5.
Motion passes. Oh, let me get my iPad back up here and running. I think we go to item 6, don't we?
7.
That
7.
was item
I'm sorry.
6.
So item 6 has passed, and we're going to item 7.
Consider approval of an amended council policy 2-5, policy regarding treatment of injuries, reporting of accidents and light duty, or take other necessary action.
Mr. Tucker.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I would like to introduce Dakota Jones. He is our safety manager. He's speaking on this item because this policy amendment was the recommendation of the Safety Committee, which, as you all may remember, was set up as part of our strategic plan for safety for the upcoming year. So Mr. Jones has been instrumental in working with the committee to prepare these recommended changes, which are now being presented for your action. Dakota.
Thank you for the awesome introduction, and good evening, Mayor and council members. The revisions to this policy are to include light duty. That word should be changed to alternative work, which is a term that Department of Labor is changing. The administrative info from personnel to human resources, the contact info for those, the references to the new drug testing policy 3-6-2, changing the hospital from E-Star to St. Francis, and then the title of the policy, which is a part that we missed, has light duty in it. It needs to be changed to alternative work. As Roy said, Safety Committee is recommending this for approval. And any questions I'm open to, and thank you.
Do we have question or comment?
Move for approval.
Second.
Got a motion in a second. Any other discussion?
What is the benefit of changing it?
The benefit of changing this is just to have the correct info. We actually don't have 918 phone numbers. We don't have the correct title for the Human Resources Department.
Light duty versus alternative duty.
That is something that was federally changed, and we just...
Let me take this one.
Yes.
Councilor Hall, if you remember back in 2013 when the state adopted the Administrative Workers' Compensation Code, our policy referenced the regular, the Oklahoma Workers' Compensation Act, not the Oklahoma Administrative Workers' Compensation Act. So the amendments will reflect the changes in state law that were adopted back in 2013, wherein one of their changes was to modify the definition of light duty, calling it alternative work, because light duty indicates an amount of weight that's carried or tasks that are done versus the type of work that's done. So we've made those changes to correct the statutory references in here, as well as to reflect the drug testing policy that was recently amended about a month ago.
Well, thank you for educating me on that. I was just curious. Thank you.
That's exactly the way Dakota was going to say it. Yeah. We got a motion and a second. Is there other comments? Roll call.
Deputy Mayor James Tully.
Yes.
Janie Boydston.
Yes.
Patrick Kale.
Yes.
Wayne Johnson.
Yes.
Ivory Van.
Yes.
Derek Reed.
Yes.
Dan Hall.
Yes.
Mayor Coburn.
Yes, motion carries. Item number 8.
Consider approval of time extension for change order number 3 on the 43rd and 45th Street reconstruction project, or take other necessary action.
Mr. Stewart or Mr. Riley? Can you hear me now?
None of these work tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah. Mayor and Council, this is the change order for Glover Construction Project on the 43rd and 45th Street project. It's a total of 141 days, which includes a shutdown in the winter through December, weather days in several different months that are listed there. There's some subgrade conditions that caused some delay, and then there's a change order that caused another extension. So it came to a total of 141 days, which sets the new completion date at June 19th of 2017, and we recommend approval of this.
Can we assume they're not going to be coming back and asking for more weather days in May?
We can hope.
I'm going to suggest that we sit down and look at some of the past projects over the last year and a half that we've extended and see if we're taken advantage of a little bit by the contractors in action on personal causes or what have you, not weather or things beyond his control. I think overall we need to try to set a standard so that contractors know that they're going to have to own up to the contract, and they'll get their due extensions for weather and what have you, but that our tolerance that we've had in the past seems like we've been a little easy, and going forward I'd like to set a new standard to make sure that our tolerances aren't so easy on some of these change order items.
Particular way you'd want to do that? Are you directing staff to
I would like to direct staff to
do that
and then provide back. Would you like to address that?
Yes, I would. We in every meeting we have with ODOT or any other entity that's doing these same type projects, we're asking them the same thing. What are they putting in their contracts to help keep these projects on time? Is there incentives? Is there timelines? And we're going through that. We're also getting the documentation that they have so that we can put that in our future projects. So we're trying to do that.
tighten up a little bit?
So that tells me that you guys think we could do a little bit better job.
And it all comes back to what goes into that upfront document.
Okay.
So, and we're working on that
But
diligently.
I say that's fair enough, and I'll move for approval.
You got a motion?
Second.
You got a motion and a second. Are there other comments?
I'm just glad that we're doing something, because it seems like we do a lot of add-ons at the end. We need more rain days. We need more this days. And I can't remember a project where we haven't added more days to something. I'm glad we're looking at doing something different.
I think several people sitting here share your same thoughts. Yeah. Other comments? Roll call.
Deputy Mayor James Scully.
No.
Janie Boydston.
Yes.
Patrick Kale.
Yes.
Wayne Johnson.
Yes.
Ivory Van.
Yes.
Derek Reed.
Yes.
Dan Hall.
No.
Mayor Coburn.
Yes. Item number 8 passes. Recognizing citizens wishing to speak, and we have Ivory is here, and somebody that's with you being here. Do you want to speak to these items?
I'll let Councilman Reed speak this time. He's got my notes over there, so I wouldn't intend to be here, Mayor, but unfortunately I am.
Councilman Reed.
What an honor. I'm Derek Reed, 550 South 7th Street, Muskogee, Oklahoma. I have been requested by fellow councilor Ivory Van to make a couple of announcements and observations. My first announcement would be an invitation to all to the 2017 annual scholarship program presented by the Fraternity Brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity. This event will be held on this Saturday, April the 29th at 3:00 p.m. They're soliciting a special invitation to city councilors to attend this event. It will be held at the Muskogee Martin Luther King Center. The unique thing about this year's scholarship presentation, 2 students will be selected who will be in attendance by a drawing to receive a $500 encouragement scholarship. So that's a new item that they're adding this year, but this is an annual scholarship program this Saturday at 3:00 p.m., and they personally invite the councilmen to attend as well as the mayor to attend this event at the Muskogee Martin Luther King Center. A special note of thank you should be sent out on behalf of Robertson Park. It's my understanding that Mr. David Thompson was the contractor who built a fence on the trail ends to stop cars from being able to travel up and down the walking trail. Mr. Van and the citizens of the Robertson area would like to give special thanks to Mr. Thompson, as well as the weekend community service crew who went in and painted this fence. They did an excellent job in providing those services for the park improvements. Also, special recognition and thanks should go to Mr. Rick Ewan and the Parks and Recreations Department and the City Manager Mike Miller for leading the way of making sure that this project got done for Robertson Park. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That concludes our agenda for today, and we appreciate your attendance with us. Thank you.